Hey guys, so I'm about to do a reaction. Hope you enjoy.
To take you for a wild ride. I'm a college student and was currently enrolled in the hardest calculus class in the school. My professor sent us home with a math problem that no one had been able to solve before. He said that Einstein himself couldn't solve it, so naturally, I wanted to be the one to crack it. I worked all day and night trying to get it done. I started crying in frustration when my adoptive sister ran up and took the paper. I was about to yell at her for scribbling on it when I noticed she had solved it in a matter of seconds. No way. This has to be a mistake. You see, my family adopted my 7-year-old sister from another country a year ago. My parents had completely given up teaching her things. They thought she couldn't learn, but I could sense that she was holding back. For the last few months, I had been teaching her to write in English. Since she is a mute who can't talk, I thought it would be good for us to learn how to communicate with each other that way. Here she was struggling to write down words like apple and cat, suddenly solving complex math equations. When I asked her how, she just shocked me again. She pushed her finger up to her lips to tell me to keep it a secret. Why would anyone want to hide being so smart? And by the way, do you want to be smarter? Subscribe to the channel to hear all our daily crazy stories, and tomorrow you will wake up smarter. So I didn't want to take credit for doing the math problem, but I did want to know if she was actually right. I brought the paper to my professor and just asked if he could take a look at it. He was so excited. When he asked who solved it, I panicked and said it was me. He was beaming. He kept telling me how proud he was and how smart I was. What's worse is he called my parents to let him know that no one in their 30-year career had ever solved it before. I wanted to tell them about my sister, but they were glowing. How could I just disappoint them? I felt so guilty and confused. I wish I never brought that stupid problem home. Every time they bought me a new gift or praised me, I looked towards her. She was always shaking her head, begging me not to tell. In retrospect, maybe I should have said something, but I stayed quiet for her. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. How did a 7-year-old know math so well but couldn't even spell out the alphabet? I yelled at her, explaining she made me feel horrible. She made me a fraud. I demanded to know where she learned so much math, and I was not about to take her playing dumb. She looked at me with a bit of understanding and started to scribble out a paycheck in front of her. From what I could make out, there were 3 words: woman, secret, run. What's this even supposed to mean? I shouted. You need to explain yourself. She sighed for a moment and flipped the paper over. This time she wrote a lot more than 3 words. In fact, she wrote an entire paragraph. Unfortunately, it was all in a strange
Sure, she's 7 years old, and I'm not that sure.
language. I stared at it for a moment and just got more frustrated. This didn't solve anything. She then did something more shocking than solving a math problem. My mute sister pulled me close and said something. She whispered in my ear, "No one tell." I agreed not to tell a soul, but she needed to promise never to touch my work again. She sadly nodded her head. I thought this would be the end of it, but unfortunately, the damage was already done. My professor told everyone about the paper. He constantly pointed out how smart I was in class, and when I tried to deny it, he just told me I was being modest. Suddenly, I went from the shy girl no one noticed to that mysterious woman everyone was talking about. At university, everyone started to show an interest in me. They started coming for help on assignments or asked how I did on my work. When I didn't want to tell or said I couldn't help, people simply thought I was being arrogant. No one likes others that don't help. In fact, did you know that some bats will start to ignore other bats that don't share? Well, I accidentally became a lonely bat, all because people thought I was hiding something when I wasn't. What started as an appreciation turned into hatred. I went from the smart girl everyone wanted to be to public enemy number 1. People tripped me in the halls and found different ways to mock.
Actually, next level. Whoa. Smartest person in the world. That's just too far.
Was solving a very complicated equation, he asked someone to come to the front. When no one did, people started pointing at me. Let the genius do it. I had no choice but to run to the front of the room and attempt to solve the equation. The problem was, I didn't know it. It was pretty obvious to both the professor and the rest of the students that I had no idea what I was doing. After I wrote the wrong thing on the board, everyone started laughing. The professor looked so disappointed. This one really popular girl who had been jealous of all the attention I received threw her sandwich at me. Soon everyone followed suit and started throwing their food. I ran out before the professor could stop them. I was so sad and embarrassed. I just sat in the
Just told the truth. But don't say it's a 7-year-old. Say it's like someone older or something. Capiche? Then you wouldn't be in all this trouble. It's very dark.
I didn't ask to be the smart girl, I cried to myself. Those girls were jerks. I looked up and saw one of the foreign exchange students. He was incredibly popular and super hot. I was completely frozen. I never thought he would speak to me, let alone defend me. They're just jealous you solved that equation. I couldn't keep the lie up any longer. Actually, I didn't do it, I admitted. He looked pretty surprised. That is not exactly something you can Google. I tried, he said. How did you manage to find it? I dug into my bag and pulled out the note my sister gave me. I figured he spoke a few languages and studied linguistics. Maybe he could help me out here. He stared at it for a moment and shoved the paper back into my hands. Before I could say anything, he covered my mouth. You know, we should meet in private, he said. What does the paper say? I asked. It says nothing, but you should really come to my dorm room tonight, 7 o'clock sharp, he said again. Okay, I stuttered, my face turning bright red. Perfect, it's a date, he said. Then he winked at me and darted in the other direction. It was confusing, but I was not about to question it. I wasn't used to getting asked on dates, and when the smartest and hottest guy in your class asks you to meet him at 7, you meet him at 7. I really thought it was a romantic date, but I didn't feel that way once I got to his dorm room. See, I had spent the last few hours getting all dressed up in my best outfit with all my makeup done. I even wore high.
I see that right? Tell me if I saw that right. Did I see an old one? Or am I going crazy?
Boy, on the other hand, well, he just looked stressed out. It was obvious he had to run back to his dorm and hadn't left his computer since our conversation earlier that day. He barely looked up at me when I walked in the room. You do know why I asked to meet you here, he asked. I just kind of sat there for a second. I didn't know what to say. He seemed very angry all of a sudden. Who wrote the paper? He shouted. Who was it? He demanded I tell him who wrote that paper. I told him my little sister drew it. He flipped his computer around very quickly. My heart stopped when I saw what was on the screen. It was my little sister, but she was wearing a business suit and had her hair done up very maturely. This was much different from her princess footsie pajamas I was used to seeing. He asked if I recognized the woman in the photo. The woman? I questioned. That's my little sister. My parents just adopted her last year. His response? She may be your adoptive sister, but she is not little. He told me to hand the letter back over to him, and he translated. It was in his native tongue, and he just wanted to make sure we were in a more private place before he disclosed what the letter was about. The content of the letter was something I wasn't prepared to hear. It said that my little sister was on the run from the police. She was a big scientist in her home country, and she was framed for a murder. She begged me not to let anyone see the paper, and she would promise never to attract attention to me again. Whoops. Here I laid out a confession to a total stranger. I asked him, how dangerous can she be? She's just a little girl who spends her days playing with ponies and dolls. He pulled up a newspaper article about a 38-year-old woman who looked like a child. He explained she had been wanted in his home country for over 10 years. Longer than I thought she was alive for. I told him that she had to be framed. She was so sweet. But he wasn't so sure about that and asked if he could meet her in person. He told me that she suffered from a disease called Turner syndrome. It's what gave her a strange appearance and let her pass as someone much younger. She was actually an adult, a very smart adult. Even if she did lie about her age, it's not the same as murder, I argued. I could not believe the sweet and charming girl who had tried to cheer me up by solving my math equation was a monster. I agreed to let him meet her, only to prove to him that he was wrong about her. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, it was one of the worst decisions of my life. He told me that we needed to keep absolute secrecy. He erased his computer history and had me write down my address on a piece of paper. He told me that if anything happened, I should check under his bed for a red envelope. I thought he was just being dramatic. How often do dates turn deadly? He told me not to answer any strange phone calls I got and to stay on the down low. Piece of cake. Or so I thought. I went straight home that day and we decided to meet the next night. He was to come to my house at around 6 p.m. I told my parents that he was my boyfriend and he wanted to meet the family. I was a little excited, even if it was just pretend. Suddenly, I got a text from him asking for my address. I thought it was kind of weird since I gave it to him earlier, but I texted the details back to him. When I heard the knock at the door, I ran over. Instead of a handsome foreigner in a suit, I got a few men in official uniforms. They walked in and demanded that we hand over my sister. I ran to protect her, but we were too late. They dragged her away. As my parents called the cops, I called the hot foreign student. How dare he sell my sister out like that? When he didn't answer, I jumped right into my car and drove to campus. I was going to give him a piece of my mind. When I got there, his dorm room was open and it looked like someone had broken into it. I searched through his stuff and noticed that there were some things missing: his phone and his laptop. I quickly ran to his bed and searched under it. I felt around until my hand touched a piece of paper. Sure enough, it was a red envelope. I immediately opened it. In it, he told me that someone must have tracked his computer and gotten information. I should make sure not to answer any messages, even those that came from his phone. If I could, I should try to convince my family to move or go on an extended vacation. Most importantly, I should never tell his or my parents anything. It would only put more people in danger. I was sobbing.
What does he mean by don't tell anyone? The parents already saw that.
Maybe none of this would have ever happened. I was feeling guiltier than ever, and it only got worse as time went on. Later that night, I received a message from a woman saying she was his mother. She explained she got my social media from her son's page. She told me how she hadn't heard from him the whole day. I didn't tell her anything. It's the least I could do. Still, it really hurt her not to have any answers. They opened up a police investigation. And to our horror, there were videos of men dragging him away at around 3 in the morning. The realization of the situation made my blood run cold. 3 a.m.? That means he probably wasn't the one who texted me earlier in the day asking for my address. I was responsible for both of their disappearances. Until this day, we have no idea what happened, or where my sister went, or where my fake boyfriend is. Please, if you know any information at all about this, I beg that you put it in the comments below. It's been some time now and I can't get any sleep, knowing that I single-handedly...
You could say that was something. My 7-year-old sister is a wanted murderer. Nice. 7-year-old to 38-year-old. Which is 38-year-old to 7-year-old. Who cares? Bye-bye.